advanced, and it's being deployed in our products. And think when I talk about, well, here's a product we have with this capability, underneath the covers, this is what's actually happening. So hopefully that will drive that point home.
Yeah. That will definitely help. So sorry, I'm going to go a little quiet here. There's quite a few things. So one of the things we learned about some updates that Zoom recently did is you have like a very short window to get some of these things in here.
Had some security concerns not too long ago, right? They were, I think you were able to look through what was it, a Mac camera, right? You were able to hack into somebody's, I think that was the issue. Yeah.
And Apple had to do a hot fix, push something out. Yep. Whoops. That's going to look good if I stop video.
I recognize that guy.
I think that was the issue.
Yeah. And Apple had to do a. All right. There we go.
Woohoo.
Yeah. All right. Hey, shoot. This is easy. I don't know why Jeff struggles with this so much. By the way, he's not here, so he is free game.
You rip on him all you want.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Yep. We usually talk about who has the prettiest hair and that kind of thing.
I'll concede that one before the argument starts.
I hit 40 and decided, since so much was going away, why not just grow out what was left? So coming back a little bit. But you won't find me spending 3 hours making it pretty.
Sort of related to AI, but I saw a clip on the news the other day of this hair transplant procedure where they use it looks this giant robotic arm that's actually plucking hair follicles out of the back of your head and placing them in other places around your scalp. And it uses
done with AI?
Yeah. Looking for the best hair follicle possible to pluck out of the back of your head and transplant in front. And the cost was incredible. I could not believe how much someone would pay for the privilege of having the hair on the back of their head show up on the front of their head. Not for me, anyway.
How much was the cost, just out of curiosity, roundabout? What was it? $10,000. Sounds less than some of those surgeries I hear some of my lady friends asking about or talking about. But
those are probably expensive too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we've got some people jumping on now, so maybe we can get this show on the road. You guys ready?
Let's do it.
Ready.
All right. Well, joining us today, we have Ryan Leslie and Dr. Frankie. And Dr. Frankie, would you like us to be formal or informal with your name today?
Oh, informal's fine. David is fine. As I like to tell people, when I worked at Trilogy, they like to call me Dr. Frankie, and my mom likes that. So, but David is fine.
Okay. We'll call you David. I might slip a little bit and throw the doctor in there. That's just the Southern respect in me for the title. Anyway, we're here today because of a little thread on DealerRefresh in the forums. And Ryan, if you want to throw that up on the screen.
Yeah. I will try. Hopefully I don't mess it up here.
But started talking about what AI might really be, and it's a bunch of if, then, or else statements. And the conversation grew into a good 6 pages, a lot of posts, and Ryan was probably the most fierce responder to anything on the subject, and obviously has a very strong perspective. And
did this work? Are you seeing your cartoon that you put up?
Yeah, we got some Scooby-Doo going on there.
Hey, I did look it up. His name is Fred, actually. Fred Jones. That might have been a trivia question for someone, but Fred Jones.
All right. Yeah, we were discussing before the show went live. We couldn't remember the names of all the Scooby-Doo characters beyond Shaggy and Scooby. And maybe Wilma?
It's Velma.
Velma. Okay. My bad.
That's why the Flintstones is hard, because you have Fred and Wilma, and this is Fred and Velma.
Good point. Yeah. Well, I want to also thank you, Ryan, for bringing Dr. Frankie, aka David, along today, because we're going to have a real conversation about what AI is, and the question as to where do you draw the line on just some I don't want to say incompetent or ignorant, but I did marketing on the term. Where's what is it? So, David, if you don't mind giving us a little background on who you are, it'd be great.
Okay. So kind of to roll back to my involvement in AI, when I first got out of graduate school and was working at Texas Instruments back in the early 80s, they got involved in building list machines, working on AI products, and I got an interest there. So I decided to go back to school here at the University of Texas in Austin. I did my PhD work and research in AI. So since then, I've kind of been working on sort of employing those kinds of techniques and solving sort of various types of problems, mostly in kind of enterprise solutions. Whether it's configuration or the work we do at VAST, making predictive models, that sort of thing. So I got started on this back in the 80s, and I think it actually plays well into the cartoon that you're looking there. And I want to start talking a little bit about sort of some of the techniques of AI and maybe making some distinctions between what we see there, why people would call that AI, and then maybe what people talk about more today, which is more along the lines of machine learning. So back in the 80s, there was a big emphasis on this notion of knowledge representation and capturing knowledge. And again, everyone here is probably too young to remember that, but the idea was something called expert systems, which is you would, knowledge engineers, which the job title people had at that time, would interview experts in particular domains and try and capture their expert knowledge. So there were things built for configuring computers, medical diagnosis was a popular domain, just lots of different problem domains where they went and found people who were experts and said, well, how do you do your job? How do you make your decisions? And one of the primary kind of representations of that knowledge were if-then rules. When you see this set of situations, then ask this next question. If you think about a doctor trying to diagnose a patient, they may ask them to say, okay, tell me where it hurts, right? And then that will lead them to another question, and the answer to that will lead them to another question. And so these expert systems were, in a sense, much like that picture you see there, which was this tree of rules. You would start out at the beginning and start sort of asking this knowledge of rules would be encoded in the expert system. And then when it was deployed, it would say, okay, how do you answer this first question? And then based on that, it would take some other route through this expert knowledge. So that was a real popular sort of approach and got some traction in the mid 80s. I was talking to Alex earlier about the fact that there was a lot of hype built around AI and expert systems in the mid 80s. And there were a lot of interesting solutions developed, but it didn't live up to the promise and the hype. And so interest waned and they kind of went into what they called the AI winter. But my point about all this is that there are a lot of systems that are considered AI systems where the knowledge is captured and curated by humans and then represented in some form, in this case, let's say if-then rules, and then that's the way the quote-unquote expert AI system gets deployed. So it's not unreasonable to sort of look at that and say, well, that's an AI system, because it's using kind of this basic approach. Now, the degree to which, how complicated it is, if you have like 3 or 4 rules, it just doesn't seem very interesting. But the basic idea was that those rules captured and codified the knowledge that an expert in that domain would use.
All right. Well, thank you for going back to the 80s. I don't know if our audience remembers that so much, but you would be considered a data scientist today, right?
Yes.
Now, what is a data scientist?
Well, it's interesting. There's lots of definitions floating around. I'll kind of give you my simple definition of what data science is and what it's all about. And it's really trying to extract insights from data. That's kind of a simple definition, but it captures, I think, essentially what data scientists are trying to do. Now, even though that definition is very simple, that task is pretty hard for lots of reasons. First of all, you have to have the data. You have to collect the data. And again, the dirty little secret in the data science community is, well, you capture the data, you prepare the data, you analyze it, and then you're done. But that piece in the middle at the beginning of preparing the data takes about 80% of the time. I mean, it is a lot of work because data is messy, there are errors, there are things that are missing. And so there's a tremendous amount of work just around acquiring the data and getting it clean in a sort of form that what we think now data scientists would be able to pick up and use. Then at that point, you've got to do some analysis of that data. And there are lots of good tools out there, and this is where we're doing things like statistics and machine learning and AI and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what most people think about the heart or the core of data science, is where you're really examining the data and extracting interesting things. But then to really be effective, there's a couple more things, is that you have to be able to, one of the important things that data scientists do is to visualize the data, in a sense, tell stories. So we tend to look at the world as just like numbers, and that just doesn't relate to a lot of people. So you have to turn around and tell the story that those numbers tell. So I think that's really important. But then the last phase, I think, is where, for a lot of companies that try and go implement data science projects, they sometimes fall down, which is to make those insights actionable. And that means you have to have good product design so that information comes through in the product. And you also have to have a lot of software engineering that takes sort of something, think about it, it's something that was done in the lab and turning it into production. But those are kind of the steps that you go through in a data science project. And the interesting thing about that is there are very few people who have all of those skills, right? You hear about people talking about the unicorns in data science. It's those few people out there that have all of those skills can do all of that. So the way most companies address that is they say, well, I'm going to get people that have competence in each one of those areas. And you have to build up kind of all of that capability. But that's kind of what, data scientists do day to day. We're just looking at our screen, slogging through data, and trying to find these interesting insights.
Well, you hit on a really big one for me, is making these things actionable. So I had the pleasure of working with a data science department in one of my former jobs, and the team was fantastic. And like you said, it is definitely about figuring out what of the data is accurate and what can you actually use, and then moving out on that. And one of the issues that it seemed we had at the company I was at was trying to actually get what was coming out of that department into the products. Mm-hmm. It was very easy to create PowerPoint presentations and go off and do fancy pitches to prospective clients and big dealer groups and OEMs with what they were producing. But God, was it hard to turn it into something actionable that dealer could use on a daily basis. Why, you touched on that a little bit, but you think there's a a simpler way to state why that's such a challenge?
So I'll give you sort of my perspective, and you see this, to me, you see the same kind of thing in sort of the software engineering world, which is that, engineers can go off and write all kinds of interesting software. Sometimes they like to go work on stuff that doesn't really matter. But what you need to really be effective there is to have input from the product side. Doing a data science in isolation is probably an interesting exercise for the data scientist, but it's not really worth paying for that. So, one of the things we do at CarStory is that our product team is thinking about products, but constantly talking to dealers, understanding what their problems are, and then coming back to the data science team and said, can you guys tell me this? What data do you need to go do that? Now, for us, the communication is actually two ways. We get that input from product, and we say, okay, that's a problem I think I can go solve. I'm going to work on that. And then along the way, sometimes there's serendipity. I say, oh, I did this, but I actually discovered this other thing as well. I think it might be useful here. But then the product people can now take that and say, oh yeah, they can go out and say, not only did we do this, but hey, this sounds pretty interesting for, your problem space, Mr. Dealer, as we understand it. Sorry, or Mrs. Dealer. Miss Dealer.
So the robots are only as good as the people, huh?
Yeah.
It's a nice twist.
But I think that input from the product team is super important, because if you think about it from a data science point of view, there's tens of things you can do every day, but you want to focus on those things that will have some value. And what I found is that you actually discover other interesting things along the way, and those can be useful as well.
Without a doubt. The path is never straight.
No.
Well, another question for you, and then we'll start to get into how some of this relates to the car business. But in terms of definitions, how would you define AI against machine learning?
Okay. So just a simple statement is that machine learning is a subfield of AI. So if you think about the Venn diagram, we've got a big circle that is AI, and there's a smaller circle inside of that, which is machine learning. But I think this is a really important point. I was talking earlier about expert systems and how those were built by knowledge engineers, humans, going out and capturing this knowledge, figuring out how to represent it, and putting it into a tool. The differentiating part about machine learning is that process is very labor intensive and it's hard to scale. What you want to do is you want to give an algorithm, here's the data, go figure it out, right? Go figure out what you need to learn from this. And that's really the essence of machine learning, which is we don't have humans figure out what the knowledge is and in a sense encode it in computer language and tell the computer. We just say, here's all the raw data, go figure out what you need to know. So that's really the key aspect of machine learning. As I said, it's a subfield. Some problems in AI are solved with machine learning. Some are solved with other, what I call hand-curated knowledge. Here's a good example of the difference between the two. There have been computer programs to play the game of Go, the board game of Go, around for some while. And just like the games that play chess, humans sat down and, in a sense, coded up strategies for how best to play that game. And there was IBM did Deep Blue, and they beat Garry Kasparov, and Google made AlphaGo, and they beat the world champion in Go. But there was something very different about those two, which was that Deep Blue and a lot of the other programs were, in a sense, their knowledge was the way humans would play the game, and they encoded that in computer language. AlphaGo was given the task of saying, just go play lots of thousands of millions of games and figure out what the best strategy is. So that program wasn't told how to play. It was told the basic rules of the game, but it wasn't told any strategies. And it learned that by, in a sense, looking at lots and lots of data, namely playing millions of games itself. So that's kind of the distinction between AI systems that use hand-curated knowledge and AI systems that use machine learning.
Okay. Well, and thank you for that. And as you talk about the games, I think of a recent one where an AI system was deployed on the biggest real-time or strategy game, I think, that's out there, StarCraft, I think is what it's called. And it took it like a week or something before it was beating the number one players of the game in the world. So
they basically set it up and said, here's how the rules, here's how you play the game, but wasn't told anything about strategy. And it just started to play and lose and said, okay, that was bad, play again, lose, that was bad, play again, win, okay, that was good. And over time starts to develop strategies that it can use to win these games. But in a sense, the algorithm learned that it wasn't coded by a human. And the one thing I would say is that there's kind of a growing consensus in the AI community that over time we will have more data and we'll have more computing power, and that machine learning approaches will always win out over these hand-curated approaches. They have in every case, but over time we'll just have more data, more computing power, and that approach will tend to win out.
Yeah, so you can't beat the numbers, huh?
Yeah.
Well, let's transition over to maybe the car business.
Okay.
And
before you leave there, Alex, I just want to settle somewhat of a dispute. I was a loud proponent of identifying the terms, because I think that's so important for dealers, because we're not going to change the marketing departments. They're going to continue to use these buzzwords. Dr. Frankie, when you were talking about AI, an AI winter and it coming back around, reminded me of something in the post or in the forum. We talked that way about attribution and some of the other buzzwords that we hear over and over and over again that just keep getting recycled through the marketing departments largely. So I'll pose the question. Is the cartoon that was showed at the very beginning of Fred with an if-then, is that technically AI? Is it correct to say that is an AI application to have a computer following an if-then type scenario all the way through to conclusion? Would you call that AI or not?
I would call it an expert system, assuming that the logic there was something that you extracted from someone who is very knowledgeable in that domain. For instance, how do you communicate with someone and get them engaged in your products? Right? If I was to do that at a dealership, I probably would be terrible at it. But there are people who are very good, and you watch the process that they go through to solve the problem. You encode that in rules. So it follows the model of expert systems, which have been around in AI for a long time.
Since how long?
Mid 80s, early 80s. Yeah.
we got a new term now, Ryan.
Yay. AI winter. I didn't know that one. So it would be accurate for me as a marketing department for a product selling to a dealer to say that I'm using AI, even if I'm using a technology that was 40 some years old, and if then function. Is that correct? I can glom onto this brand new buzzword of AI just by, maybe I'll ask a different way. Dr. Frankie, how low is the barrier to entry to saying that you're using AI?
I don't know if there's like an official number of rules or whatever, but the more interesting systems like that had thousands or tens of thousands of rules. And so if you have something that's fairly like people described it here, a flow chart that you can draw on one page, I suppose that's always debatable. But one of the things that to get at these terms some more, I think one of the things that you can always turn back to someone who's talking about this about their products is to ask them the question. It says, okay, does your AI system, is it trained on machine learning, or is it using hand-curated knowledge? That's kind of a question that you can ask, and it will start to tell you that, okay, they're doing something that's more, let's say, expert system-based versus machine learning. If they claim to do machine learning, then I think the next set of questions are, well, what data do you use to train your algorithms? And how much data do you have to do that? For instance, you could, if you had, let's say, if you captured millions and millions of interactions between a person in the BDC and a customer calling in, you could probably start to learn from all those conversations using machine learning. What's the path of questions when the customer says this? What next question do you ask? What information do you show them? But that takes a lot of data. And so my comment is that, or my point would be, if they're taking if they're using machine learning, then say, well, what's your data? What data are you training on? And how much do you have? Because really, to be effective, you have to have thousands, if not tens of thousands of examples to learn from when you're doing machine learning. But those are kind of a couple basic questions you can ask to try and get under get under the hype and say, well, what's really going on under the covers here?
So I think it should be said that a car dealer probably doesn't care whether AI is actually being used, machine learning is being used, or some sort of expert system is being managed by an intelligent designer. At the end of the day, I think you just hit on what they should care about, is the amount of data being brought in to make that product better. So, like, if you see I'm going to be a little unfair in the statement, and it might not apply to everybody, but let's say you've got a startup chat company, and they're saying that they've got AI in their system, but they only have 100 clients using the tool. Probably not enough data there.
I agree. And then what they will do is they'll start with like hard-coded exactly these if-then rules or whatever to try and collect data. Then at some point they may have enough to start to do real machine learning on it, but that takes a significant amount of data to really learn anything that's non-trivial.
Yeah. So if you're a company like IBM, for example, there's no question you have the data to be able to do it on the other side of the scale. Yeah,
I was trying to think. There's some companies that implement here in Austin that implement customer feedback on sites, and so they for instance they run it on Target's site and other major retailers. So they collect thousands and thousands of reviews and comments from customers. So they have the volume of data to actually do machine learning on that.
Okay. So if, let's say, a vendor in the automotive space was using a AI technology like IBM Watson or some of the other ones that are available out there, it's more about the volume of data at that point and less about what algorithm they use. Correct? Or am I way off base?
No, I think that's true, because the more data that you have, the more solid the inferences that you can draw from that. So if I'm, let's say I'm building trying to build an algorithm to help me price a vehicle in a certain market. If I look out there and I see 10 cars, I'll say, okay, I'm going to pick the average price or whatever. Well, that's probably not very effective because those 10 cars are very different. But when we do that, we look across all the VINs that we've seen for sale over the course of 12 or 13 months, which is usually over 40 million, and that's the scale of data that now gets you to the point where you can make these inferences that you feel pretty confident in.
Well, you've just given us an excellent segue to the next section. Is what technologies can use AI in the car business? I mean, you just hit on one, and we talked about chat tools for a moment. Mm-hmm. I know that Vast or CarStory is doing some cool stuff with imagery. That's got some of the longest legs, in my opinion, for probably the next phase of making the whole industry better. Mm-hmm. You guys mind expanding on that one?
Sure. I think that's a great place to start. We've done a lot of work on this, and so I'm going to back up to the point we were just making about, in order to solve this problem, we need lots of data. So Vast has been collecting for sale listings for over 10 years. So I don't remember the exact number, but we have on the order of 2 billion images. Car listings come to us, and some of them will have 10 images, some will have 40. But all aspects of the car, looking inside, looking at the engine compartment, that sort of thing. So one of the things that we did was we started to pull those images out, and I'll throw a few buzzwords at you, but there's kind of a recent technology that's kind of reinvigorated the whole AI space, is this notion of deep learning neural nets. So they figured out a new way to build these neural nets to solve more significant problems than they did 10, 20 years ago. So what we use these neural nets, and we basically feed it lots and lots of images. So one of the first problems we solved was we gave it all these images, and we simply said, okay, here's an image that's front on the vehicle. Here's what we call the hero shot, which is like 30 degrees to the side. Here's the left flank, the right flank, the rear. And we started to train this neural net on all these different image orientations. So what we do today at CarStory is when we get new listings, the first thing we do is we run through all the images. We standardize the size of the image, number of pixels, and then we classify it. Is this the hero left or the hero right, engine compartment, tire, vent to vent, looking at the sort of all of that. And the reason for that is what we've learned in running various websites is that it's interesting to rearrange the images to put the ones that we think users are most interested at the beginning of this long list of maybe 40. Like we did a study and found that that 9 images was about the right number. If you get sort of many more than that, you kind of get into this image fatigue and people just leave because they're tired of having to scroll through the carousel down to the 30-second image in order to see what the dashboard looks like. But the point is now that we can automatically classify the images, reorder them, and change the order of the way they show up in the website. Now, the reason this is interesting is now you can start to do automated experiments to say, okay, I think this is the right order of images and the right number, but let me change the order. I'm going to put the hero shot in first, and then I'm going to put the engine compartment and then the driver's cockpit image to see, does that increase engagement on my site or not? But again, you have to be able to do that labeling, and to do that, you have to have backed up and had done this classification. So once we started with that, we said, well, hey, what else can we do with that? And kind of one of the major uses in CarStory now for looking at images is to compare the image with the text data that we get for listing to see if it's correct. Typically, we get a lot of missing data, and so we are going to go in and add that. So, for example, we can recognize, the body style. For instance, is this a regular cab, extended cab, or crew cab by looking at the image? We also can determine the bed length. Is this a short bed or a long bed? What kind of wheels does it have? Aluminum, chrome, whatever. We can verify it. We can look at the color and compare that with what they said the color was. We can look at the speakers and make an estimation about what kind of sound system does this have. Is it Bose? Is it Panasonic? Whatever. Another big one we see as an error in our data, there's two actually. One is, what type of transmission is it? So we've trained our model to look at the picture of the console and figure out if it's an automatic or a manual. And we can then compare that with what the text says if it's there. But finally, the biggest one, and all the listeners here will understand that the trim can be a big swinger on the price of a vehicle. So if you're going to merchandise this vehicle, you want to get the trim right, because it's going to, in a sense, people who are doing searches are going to say, wait a minute, this vehicle seems to be too high priced for that particular trim. So what we've done with our algorithms is figured out how to look at pictures of the vehicle and figure out what the trim is. So sometimes it's the back quarter panel, like on a lot of F-150 trucks. The trim is actually listed on the side of that. On Camrys, it's on the back, so we'll find the images that's from the rear of the vehicle, zoom in on is it LE, SE, whatever the trim is. So we can use that to verify and clean up and complete the data that we have. So that, another reason that's super important is we talked about data for data scientists, is that it's helpful if that data is correct. If you have a lot of noise in the data, what you can learn from it is not as interesting. So having all that data corrected like that is really a boon for the data science team.
It's also helpful for the consumer and the dealer. I mean, if you think about retail operations, you're missing at bats if you don't have the kind of equipment or even the we use transmission as an example. If I'm shopping for a Mustang, the only way I'm buying a Mustang is if it's the V8 with 6-speed. That's the only way I'm buying it. So when I'm searching for that car, I'm going to left-hand sidebar, I'm selecting manual, I'm putting a checkbox there because I don't want the noise of all of the automatics. That's not what I want. So if we've got the wrong transmission listed on that car coming through your feed out to the third-party sites, I'm not ever going to see your car. You could have exactly the car I want, right color combination, all the right options. If they're not in the feed, not listed in the feed that's going to the third parties, to the classified sites in your own site, I don't even know you're there. I mean, it is the worst possible scenario, I think. Outside of one other scenario, I can think of this be pretty bad too. If we're going to throw some more buzzwords around, but if digital retailing really gets to the promise of digital retailing, where as a consumer, I'm buying this car from my couch and I'm expecting to come in and pick it up and drive it off of your lot. If I show up on that shiny new Mustang that I thought I bought with the 6-speed and it's an automatic, you're going to have some challenges there you're going to have to unwind. So there's a whole lot of downstream effect for merchandising being correct for the dealer. Trim's a whole nother level of multiple downstream concerns when you get the trim wrong. I've seen this. I've been looking at these reports that we're doing through VinSpect right now, which is a product that we have, and great dealership groups, number 2, number 3 dealership groups in the country, strong operators with significant numbers of errors in these areas. And it's because it's not an easy problem. It's a difficult problem for the dealership to get listings correct all the time invariably. It's not an easy one. It's a perfect one for data scientists that have all of the disparate data sources that they can put together into one complete picture. But for a human to try to do that, much, much more challenging, especially at the rate that they have to do it, just in scale, and also with the quickness that's required to get that car listed online. They don't have a ton of time to process. So it really is a great opportunity for data science and for real artificial intelligence to step in and help with that problem.
Well, you're hitting on a very big item with digital retailing. One of the threads we've got on digital retailing is, why doesn't it work? And it's a little less focused on the technical aspects of it, a little more focused on the philosophical aspects. However, on the technical side, that's a big deal. So why have website providers for so long only stuck to having some very generic payment calculator on a website? Well,
you don't want to be wrong.
Most of the time, yeah, because if you're not right down to the trim, down to the options, your payments, if you're automating anything about it, are off. You're going to shove the wrong lease residual. You're going to have all sorts of things be problematic. But it goes twofold because the data suppliers. So when it comes to payments, you have Cox has something, and MarketScan, who's the titan of it all, they require breaking these vehicles down to very detailed levels as well, especially with trucks, domestic trucks, that is. And in order to show the right rebates, it can even have to come down to how many days that car has been in stock. There's a lot of data points that have to be accounted for and pulled in. And then on the opposite side of it, you have what's shown to the consumer. So the one who's been at it the longest is probably Chrome, and there's some other ones like Data One out there and whatnot who also do this. And you also have to be able to break things down on their end. So what you actually show to the consumer is correct. More to your point, being able to say, hey, that's an F-150 Lariat with package 502A. So you've got to do double effort on that front now if you're going to be doing a digital retailing solution. And it's very complex and requires a lot of accuracy.
From the data I've seen, we need to
And by the way, it's pretty funny. Joe Chura just joined on that note. So
nice. From the data I've seen, we have to get trim right every time. We have to get transmission right every time before we're going to get to that level of interaction with the customer. So kind of back in my history, but at the DealerRater days, I can't think of a better way to generate a negative review than sell the customer the wrong car, or tell them it has tell it has options on it doesn't have. You're asking for a heat case there.
Another place that in terms of technology and products we're working on at CarStory for dealers specifically has to do with using these images to get cars correct, but think about it in terms of evaluating a trade-in that you want to put on your lot for resale, or purchasing inventory at wholesale. So getting those things right, understanding what's on the vehicle is super important.
No doubt. It's a headache every day for the tech companies to try and chase down what this car is supposed to be. Yeah. So these are some things, some examples that AI is doing. It's helping with vehicle pricing. It's helping with identifying what kind of car this actually is. And then we sort of brushed over the chatbot piece. That's kind of been I guess the biggest use of it, at least in our space. And maybe one of the oldest would be acting as a chat operator. What are some other things that you guys have come across?
So thinking about this, we have something we call the Vision App, but it's very, very much related to training a neural net now, not to recognize the orientation of the vehicle, but to tell me specifically. I can take my phone, point it at a car, and it'll tell me the year, make, model, and trim of that vehicle, or at least the year within the generation of that vehicle. And so the idea with this, the way we're using it is, a consumer has this on their phone, they're walking down the street and they go, hey, that's an interesting car. They point their phone at it and say, what is that? They can learn what it is, but then we can immediately show them, oh, and here are 5 units of that type of vehicle for sale in your local area. So it's kind of an entry into what we don't call it really search, we call it the discovery process, which is sort of, I want to start searching for cars by saying, hey, there's something I like. What is that? Okay, now, are those for sale? Can you show me another thing we've worked on hard at CarStory is, can you show other cars that are similar to that? So we developed AI algorithm to measure similarity. You know, some are obvious, like, well, okay, someone shopping for a Camry probably is going to look at an Altima and a Accord. But it learns, in a sense, it learns those kinds of associations so that we can now make recommendations to customers when they're looking at one vehicle and saying, you might also be interested in this. Very, very much like Amazon would do.
I'll pick on the refresh community for just a second, but Alex, you remember when Uncle Joe made the slide, or I guess was a Survey Monkey, of name the car? He debadged a bunch of white SUVs and asked us to go through and pick out make and model. And I think this is an app that, you know, car guys and gals could use too. It'd help us to be able to identify what we're looking at sometimes. So if anybody didn't do that, it's a fun little test of how well do you really know your inventory. I think the fail rate on that, I think the abandon rate on it was 50% of people gave up before they ever got to the last slide. So definitely worth looking at.
One of the things we've been working on, it's still a research project for us, is to be able to make an assessment of damage on a vehicle by looking at images of the vehicle. I think that'll come, play into, we think about, if you're doing, making an estimate in terms of auto body work in a service department, that sort of thing, that could be very useful in helping out with that. I think Ryan and I were kind of brainstorming about this a bit of sort of what other kinds of things might you want to do if you say, well, I have a car that looks like this. What aftermarket accessories are there that I might be interested in that fit on this car? And then show them images of that vehicle with that particular accessory on it, whether it's, spoiler or running boards or whatever it is. So I don't think we've explored that to its full extent, but I think there are a lot of opportunities there, which, today, again, those problems are solved well by humans, because we can look at that and say, oh, that's what that is. Here's what you need.
Yeah, you get crazy with the accessories and some augmented reality. Just holding your phone up and seeing a car on there that you might be looking at physically, and then being able to swipe through a spoiler or wheels, it'd be pretty cool. In the service department, I've always wondered if there was a way to help the technicians out with better diagnosis, or cutting down the time of research that goes into diagnosing things. So maybe, if they're having to go back to a computer screen or even a repair manual, could you quickly get them there just by analyzing the image or whatever they're holding up to look at the car with?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I'll have to admit ignorance here in terms of auto repair. That's not my thing. But it does, again, when I think about this, I always go back to, like, what's the first problem I have? It's, I have to get a whole bunch of images that say, this is what a burned valve looks like. This is what a burned spark plug looks like. And here's what a good spark plug looks like. And I need thousands of those to then go train my algorithm to look at something and make an assessment. But I think there's maybe not necessarily related to images, but a lot of the diagnostic tools that we have today on vehicles, you plug in and you download a lot of data about the car's driving history over the last time period, and all these, in a sense, readings from all of the various, monitors that are in the vehicle now, helping someone go through and assess that, and make recommendations about, okay, this seems to be a problem, look here first, maybe even kind of give a technician a series of, okay, try this, try that, or look here, look that, look there, so they don't have to go back to the manual, but they can have that, in a sense, more interactive and right in front of them. I think there's some opportunities there just in terms of diagnosing problems. And I'm assuming that, all the OEMs or aftermarket companies are thinking about that kind of thing, because there's tons of data that you can collect off of vehicles now.
Yeah, or even ordering parts from it. I mean, I worked in the parts department for a while, and God, the stuff we had to, all the thing, and back when I did it, we were using microfiche. But yeah, just being able to quickly pinpoint and actually get the right part for the job, that's a huge one. So there's some very practical and great things to do there. Now, I want to take a little bit of a turn here, and we've got two questions that are sort of similar coming from the Facebook group. One's from Dan Sayer, the other one's from Brian Tucker. And Dan's asking, if the OEMs will ever relinquish their control over the data so that you can have cleaner, more accurate information that better matches the stuff that they do. And then follow that up with Brian Tucker, who is asking if there's anything going on out there to even create some sort of standardization that can help all of this out. I know the answer, but go ahead, guys.
Okay. Well, the answer about OEMs providing particularly build data off of vehicles is very interesting for us at CarStory, because we're trying to make descriptions of vehicles as accurate as possible. So if we have the build data, then we can say, okay, at least when it rolled off the factory floor, here were the options. There could be aftermarket stuff and that kind of thing, but we can have a pretty good, assessment of what that vehicle is. So, that's a question. The OEMs giving that up, I don't know. I have no insight into that. But the second question is super interesting, and it's actually one that we've worked on at CarStory, which is a standardization of terminology. So we bring all of these vehicle descriptions in, and one of the things that we do in our data pipeline is we normalize all of the data. So, for example, the reason we did this originally was, when someone's searching, let's say, for red cars, they probably just want to type in red or select red on a navigation bar on a search site. They're not going to say, fire engine red or all these other kinds of sort of elaborate names that the manufacturers give these colors. So what we've done is we've taken that, but we tried to standardize lots of other terminology around features and options, so that when people are doing search, they see the same term, even though the OEMs may have slightly different names for all of that. So what we do is we take our standardized or normalized name plus the manufacturer's name. This is a six-speed synchromesh transmission, whatever, and over here we say, 6-speed. Then one of the things that allows us to do is, sometimes people want to take our data and map it to Chrome, to map it to Black Book, map it to KBB, to in a sense, what's the value of this vehicle for me? So we can do is take all that standard terminology and map it out to all of those sort of very specific sets of, names of trims and terminology that each one of those different different companies use. So we've had to do that as a matter of of making a lot of our products work, because people want to use different sources for things like, give me a trade-in value for this vehicle. So that we've actually made an attempt to do that ourselves at CarStory.
Well, that's a great answer, and you're taking me into another segue. But before we go there, I do want to point out something that Bill Playford is saying in the comments, because I think he's got the answer to why don't the OEMs play and why isn't there standardization. It's all, I'll expand on a little bit. If it's profitable this quarter, it can get done. But if it's any other time, it ain't ever going to happen.
We'd
Or you have to have a Steve Jobs kind of leader who pushes it.
It's going to have to be pitched as an economic benefit for them to ever do that.
Yeah. So I've got one other question in relation to VAST and CarStory, and I know you work on Home Story as well, Dr. Frankie. Before we jump into how AI can replace people, but what you've touched on some of this, but I'm not sure if there's some other examples you want to provide. So what has enabled VAST to be so successful with AI?
Oh, it's a great question. So to start with, I'm going to go back to the first thing I talked about, which was the data. Our approach is very much using machine learning, and so you have to have lots of good, high quality data. And so what's happened at VAST over the last 10 years is we've got a data team that's just been grinding on this every day. So every day they work on making the data, better, more accurate. I'll give you an example of what I call the virtuous cycle. So we've built an algorithm from all of our data that says, I think, okay, here's a vehicle. It's going to be sold in the Austin marketplace. I think this is the mid-market price for that vehicle. So we get a new piece of inventory in our feeds, and we run it through the algorithm. We say, okay, here's what we think the price will be. I'm going to compare that what the listing price is. Wait a minute, it's way off. Okay, what's going on here? So two things can happen. One is our algorithm is just wrong, or there's something wrong in the data, something's missing or whatever. So we use that to kick that out to someone to go look at and say, okay, what's wrong here? There's some things you can do automated as you look at it and you say, oh, the price was 2015. Probably they got the price, the year field in the price field. Mm-hmm. So what we do then is we can contact, we technically can't change the data, but we can contact the dealer, say, this looks like this is an error. Is that right? They'll say, oh yeah, fix that. And so now we improve our data, which goes into the next round of training their algorithms, which makes them more accurate, which goes back and now helps us in analyzing the data as it comes in. But my point there is having lots of data. We've been collecting it for over 10 years, and having accurate data, which is the thing that our data team does and works on every day, is super important. So that's the first part of it. The second is more kind of advances in the general tech community. I mentioned this idea of back in the 80s, there was a lot of high expert systems. We kind of went into AI winter. But there's a group working all along on this notion of neural nets, and you've probably heard the term deep learning neural nets. They actually figured out some new stuff to do within the last, let's say, 10 years. So that technology now is available to us. One of the things, though, it's very compute intensive. So fortunately, we also have a lot of computing power available. We can run on the cloud. We can allocate 50 machines to run for a week if that's what we need to do. So I think those two things have also helped us at VAST. I mean, we didn't do that, but we're just leveraging those advances in technology. But then the last one, I think, is the other thing that you mentioned, Alex, which is focus on doing something that's actually useful or actionable. So we're very, as I said, we could think of our data science team as a lab, and we just do interesting stuff, and we don't care if anybody cares about it. But that's not our approach, which is we want to go trying to figure out if there are problems that dealerships are having that we can actually go solve. So I think that's super important part of being successful in terms of bringing AI to use in this vertical.
You make a great point, again, on the actionable side, and I'd love to hear that from you, because what I've encountered with some data science departments is it's more of a playground, just to play with data, and for some exec in a company to say, yeah, we got a data science department. Yeah. So speaking of people, one of the things that comes to mind when you say AI is, not just Arnold Schwarzenegger and the end of the world and robots killing humans, but more like sophisticated programmatic code, being able to replace repetitive jobs. And dealerships have some repetitive jobs. So do we, is there anything we see in the future, maybe the near future, that might start to shift the way some of the roles in stores are working?
So I think one of the goals of a lot of AI work has been to say, let's go do the mundane tasks so that people can free themselves up to do the more interesting, but maybe even more high value kinds of things. And I think that's really the way we think about it at CarStory and Vast, which is that there are a lot of decision makers, let's say, in the organization. We talked about the used car manager, right? They've got to make a lot of decisions in terms of pricing and inventory acquisition and that sort of stuff. So one of the problems in today's world is there's just more and more data to go try and ingest and consider in those decisions. So what we're trying to do is to build tools that are really, in a sense, assistants or aids in that task. They're not going to say, okay, this is what you should do. Go buy this, price it at this. It's going to sell in 24 days. It's going to be, well, okay, here's what the market looks like. Here's how this vehicle is positioned. If you move the price by this much, you move from 50% to 75% of the market or whatever. But in a sense, take all of that information that's there, digest it in an intelligent way, and turn around and produce some kind of output that's now useful for let's say for the used car manager in this case. But make it helpful to them so that they can, in a sense, do their job faster, more efficiently, and make better decisions. When I mean better, meaning whatever the goal of the organization is in terms of profit or margin or turn rate or whatever, they're going to have certain goals and just make those decisions sort of more efficient and more productive in that direction. So that's the way I see it now. In a sense, I guess that if, in some ways I think it would be good if I'm the used car manager, I don't have to slog through all the data. I've got a good, useful summary there in front of me. But now, maybe I've got lots of extra time on my hand and there's other things I can go do. I think those guys are probably super busy. So what I think we're trying to do is to help them out and make them a little more efficient with their time.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. And I think the industry has felt that for the used car manager since the introduction of the vAuto program and even some of the others. But I think vAuto gets the lion's share of the credit for that and just being able to help them better price inventory. Yeah, anything like, you talk about repetitive things and Brittany Crutchfield.
Before you go there, I was going to, one of the things that comes up is the race to the bottom, right? We have talked about that intently on the forums. So there is something to say for, I think the term's augmented intelligence. I think Bill Playford might have introduced me to that, but the combination of human and artificial netting a better result than one or the other. And that's true there too. We have to be able to interpret the data that's coming from the machine with that human feel to really understand whether or not the action is correct or the influence is correct. Sometimes it's not. We've done some pretty intense stuff, and I'm not picking on vAuto. I got a lot of good friends there, but market day supply is a metric that I don't believe in. I think that when you look at the data, there's a key piece that's missing there, and it is the human. So if we're pricing Nissan Altimas the same across an entire market space, everybody listening to this knows that certain dealers are going to do better with a Nissan Altima than others. If all you sell is diesel trucks, the market average of a Nissan Altima doesn't matter to you. I mean, it just doesn't matter. The employees, your dealership, how quickly you can turn those vehicles, none of that's going to be determined by a market day average or a market day supply. So I think that's just one instance of where, a more intense use of the data or more practical application of that artificial intelligence can really help a dealer's operations by using data science that incorporates the dealer as a variable in that algorithm, because they do matter. They matter in much more than anything else, arguably, in that market day supply. So sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there, but that's one of the things that I think is really interesting in what we're doing with our analysis is adding the dealer's previous experience and how we know they're going to do with those cars to that prediction of days on lot at acquisition. So before you buy the car, I can help you determine how long you're going to have it. Sorry, one other thing I'd mention, any number that's totally reactive to a market is going to be challenged as the market changes. So just because we bought a car today that had a market day supply that was determined by a market, and that number was favorable, that doesn't mean it's favorable tomorrow. So that's one more reason why how you do with that unit is going to matter more than how many are for sale in the market or even how many sold in the last 45 days.
To a point Dr. Frankie made earlier in the show, like, the people are what makes it all happen. It's still about how good the people are. Yeah.
That isn't going to change, I don't think. I
No.
think not in the foreseeable future. Right? There are so many good people that work in the industry and smart people that sit behind the desks and figure these things out. I think artificial intelligence only helps them do their job better. It can offload some of the things that anybody could do and allow them to do the things that they're truly good at and do more of it.
Yeah. And this might be a little selfish, but I think of a place of opportunity for AI. A significant one is in the internet departments. You're in the market for a Mustang. I'm in the market for a certain vehicle, a giant people hauler my wife is dying to have. And I have been reaching out to stores, within a 400-mile radius. And because it's a very specific thing we're looking for. I think I counted it up this morning just because I was a little disgusted by what was going on. And it's 18 stores I've reached out to. 2 have responded. How many do you think actually responded to what I asked in the comments of the lead form?
0.
0. Yes. And those responses have all been, when can you come in?
Sure, there's somebody watching here that has exactly what you need, Alex. You're never supposed to say you're looking for a car in a forum like this.
I hope so. Although I am looking for something a little older, so it's pretty specialized. But anyway, like that's something that the first couple of responses to a lead could more intelligently be done with the right kind of technology. This is more to my point. I don't need to hire someone to go out and just ask customers when they can schedule an appointment or here are our hours, come see us.
Yeah. One of the things we've investigated, Alex, is, as I mentioned earlier, we've trained an algorithm to look at this notion of similarity. And so you could imagine now in the internet department, they get your email, but they can say, okay, what is this guy looking for? We don't have specifically that, but we actually have these similar vehicles on the lot. I'm going to respond with, here's some other information that, things that you may be interested in, without, in a sense, have to do research. I mean, it's just there at their fingertips to say, well, okay, show me the vehicles that I have on my lot that are similar to that, and then compose an email and respond back to actually give you some useful information and maybe even compel you to go down to the dealership.
Yeah, agreed. Some of the best responses were one of the most God, why am I'm sort of blanking out here, but one of the best responses we had for people in my dealer days was not just giving them a number, but more so giving them other routes to look, to go down, to your point. And that's a highly effective way to respond to people. Yeah.
When they make sense, as I've traveled around looking at dealer websites, it is oftentimes that you're looking at small Nissan Versas or something like that, and one of the other options will be a giant pickup truck. If it doesn't align to what they're looking for, it doesn't help. So I think, Alex, in your case, looking for something very specific, that's probably unique. Most people in that first lead, they're not really sure what they're looking for yet. We know that from years and years of people showing up on lots and getting switched to another car. So it absolutely makes sense to give them options at that stage. Overall, though, there's improvement. There's opportunity for improvement for sure in lead response.
Yeah.
We're so focused on stopping the clock, sometimes we forget that stopping the clock might have also stopped the transaction. That's a problem. So we need to let dealers do what dealers do and do the job well, not force them into compliance to rules that don't make sense or don't help the consumer. I think that's a problem.
That is a very good point. We need to coin that phrase. Sometimes stopping the clock stops the transaction. Yep. Love that, Ryan.
It's true.
Yep. Well, guys, I know we're coming up on the end of the hour. Yeah, we forgot to mention Jeff Kirshner, or maybe I forgot to mention Jeff Kirshner. He's out on his annual family vacation this week and couldn't be on today. He was really looking forward to doing this one, but this is a big vacation for them. They're doing some cool stuff. I'm very jealous, actually. Although I have enjoyed talking to you both. And Dr. Frankie, really, thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on and enlightening things for us quite a bit. I'm not sure we're any closer to what an AI term in the marketing department rule is, but
hopefully
you're closer, Alex. We're closer.
Okay.
Give me any tools to help evaluate that. So
it's automation. It's a really low barrier to entry. That's what we know. The follow-up question has to be what Dr. Frankie said. Tell me what you really mean. What does that word mean when you say it? And if you can explain that to me, then as a dealer, I'm in a better position to make a purchase decision from you. If I understand those words, throw the term out and get to what they're actually doing. That's going to be the best way to understand whether or not you want to engage.
Which will kill any salesperson saying it.
Well, maybe, or give
unless
them
it's you, Ryan.
Well, I don't know. There's a reason Dr. Frankie's here talking to you, not just me, right? I know what I don't know. I never have to worry about, the old adage of you never want to be the smartest guy in the room. I never have to worry about that when I visit our office. I know that's not the case. So,
yeah, well, Dr. Frankie's proving that today. So,
yes.
Oh, ouch.
All right, guys. I really appreciate the time today, and hope that we get to do this again another time.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot more you could share with us, Dr. Frankie.
Sure. Be glad to do that.
Oh, we'll take you up on it. So till next week, everyone, enjoy your Friday.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.